Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. Learn more at alumni.psu.edu. And from viewers like you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Johnson. Data is all around us. Everything we do generates it, and that data is constantly being collected and analyzed. We often hear about Facebook and Google collecting and selling our data, but what does that mean and how is that data being used? On this episode of Digging Deeper, Penn State President Eric Barron talks to Vashant Hanavar, Director of the Center for Big Data Analytics and Discovery Informatics, and Dr. Matt Jordan, Associate Professor of Film, Video, and Media Studies, about big data.
Thank you both for joining me. Interesting topic, big data, but kind of a strange set of words there. What exactly does it mean when it's big data? Because it seems to me like there's every kind of range of the world of data.
Well, I think big data is a term that came out of industry. So initially it was meant to capture large quantities of data, but increasingly it's much more, diversity of data, trustworthiness of data, basically complex, large, data that's coming at you at great velocity.
So not necessarily some size that's a magic amount that we call big data.
Right.
It's pulling all sorts of pieces together. It's the
Right.
complexity of it, but it also tends to be very large data sets.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So is it a who that collects this, or is this an amalgamation?
That's a good question, I think, is who or what collects it, and that collection can come from anywhere in terms of where people are getting their data sets, and they tend to be large, and they work better the larger they are. The algorithms work better the larger they are, and so that leads to a kind of a relentless search to increase the size of the data sets.
So, it seems to me that maybe the easiest way to think about this is to go through some examples. So I can tell on the home computer what my wife has been shopping for because the advertisements are popping up there. Is this part of a big data analysis of a consumer? Is that an example that we're looking at today?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is the one that in my field, in media studies, that we study the most is how every time your wife goes online, and every time you go online, and increasingly anytime you do anything in the background of your mobile device or computer, there's something collecting data on you. And what it's doing is it's creating psychographic profiles of your what you do, your behaviors, and in order to predict them. And this is from the media and the advertising perspective, it then creates targeted advertising that would be targeting the things that you've done in the past in the attempt to predict what you'll do in the future.
How I borrow, what I shop for, what my patterns are, and then they zero in on me and say, this is something that you want.
You're vulnerable to. This is something that you have shown that you have shown a weakness for. And the idea is if they know when to target you, that you're more likely to it. In many ways, the analogy is what you would call psychological architecture for stores, right? You put the candy next to the checkout aisle because the kids that are with the parents will say, I want that. And now it's just done on a massive scale. They know what to put in the checkout aisle so that, you or your wife will buy it.
So is this an example of a profit motive, but is there the potential for considerable misuse then?
Yeah, so particularly in applications like advertising or other, insurance or finance, there's always a potential for misuse, right?
Yeah.
Because when any organization, however well-intentioned, has so much information about so many people, there's always a potential for misuse. One of the things that I think we have to worry about as a society is, understanding this technology. I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
And how best to make use of it, how to regulate it. and that's an open question. I think we don't have the answers.
So this is an objective, how do we protect an individual and
realize
how do
the
we regulate
potential.
it? Hot topic for research?
Yeah,
or?
it's a hot topic for research. It's a research topic that cannot be addressed by computer scientists alone, because you can't address it by just focusing on the algorithms. You have to sort of take the human, the social aspects of it. After all, we want algorithms that in some ways realize our values, right?
Yeah.
So if we take the example of online advertising, I think I would like to get recommendations about the books that I might want to read, and that seems perfectly fine, right? At the same time, if the targeting of the ad gets to the point where some individual that's vulnerable at a particular moment is targeted with an ad that would maybe not in their best interest, that becomes unethical, and most of us would be uncomfortable with that. And so the question, again, same with health data. I mean, I think there's a massive, upside to looking at all of the health data that we collect and using that to, personalize therapies, predict side effects of drugs, on an individual level and improve treatment. But it could also be that the same data could be used to deny somebody health insurance. And so how do you balance these?
So that seems to me to be a great example. So with big data, I could look at an individual, all of the environmental factors, their genetic factors, what they eat, how they all these other factors, and I could look at you and start to make predictions.
Right.
So this would be an incredible boon for medical science.
Right.
Is this a reality?
It's not a reality yet, but I mean, that's an area of active work, including here at Penn State.
Specifically because of the importance of healthcare to people, or because we're sensing that we have the information we need?
I think it's a combination. So one of the things is, when the Genome Project was launched, there was a hope that once you figure out the genome, you could come up with cures for most illnesses, because you could target particular mutations or drugs that for specific diseases. But that hasn't really quite borne out, except in some narrow set of cases, right? Increasingly, what we are learning is that about 70 to 90% of our phenotype, in other words, that's not determined by our genome. So the rest is the environment, our behavior, all of this. So in many cases, even sort of social circumstances that impact health. Stress,
yeah,
right? Even simple things like having access to a grocery store or access to transportation, right? So not every health-related intervention has to be necessarily a new drug.
Yeah.
There are many ways to improve health, and so and we don't have a good understanding of it because we have never had this kind of data to mine. And therefore, that's a tremendous
factor all this in.
opportunity.
I mean, I've been in a number of rural areas where sometimes grocery shopping, much fewer fresh vegetables and fruits, because so all these things combine in here.
Right.
And you start to make predictions. And I imagine the whole notion of drug testing would completely change as well, because for the first time, if you had a really large integrated information, you might see side effects that no simple study would.
Yeah, and that's already beginning to happen. I mean, there are results out now that suggest.
So powerful tool.
Powerful tool.
Flip side is what happens to your insurance.
Flip side is the privacy side. How do you tie people to their data? And this is what is the main. So this morning I was watching a little bit of this international thing on fake news that's happening in the UK, and Zuckerberg was not there because he didn't show up, but they were blistering the vice president with questions about how to protect people's data. Now they claim we never release to companies your data. We just have a profile of you, and then we match the profiles with people who are vulnerable to certain things. It could be drugs, things, but that's the big concern, is that when people are sharing these vast amounts of data, a lot of the privacy concerns get thrown out the window. Facebook is gathering data, selling data constantly. Every app that you put on your smartphone, and 3 billion people have smartphones, every app can share that data that you've had, your entire digital history, with whoever is out there willing to buy it. And that's the huge concern right now in terms of privacy. What's the responsibility of the company who's using this data to protect you?
So we have data breach after data breach after data breach where, you know, I get informed your social security number has been. So that's my social security number. Now you're saying my whole persona, everything about me is out there somewhere for somebody possibly to hack.
Yes, yes, and they're trying to get more and more data. It was, you know, I have a kind of dystopic side of this, probably too much science fiction as a kid, but you know, these ads for Facebook's portal. Facebook, which is a thing that follows you around the room so you can have a conversation.
Yeah.
But Facebook also has a patent on a thing that will track your eye movement to show what you look at on the screen, to listen to the background environment, to hear what the conversations are, what you're talking about. And then it will use that to say, whoever wants to buy, this person was just talking about apples, you know, let's get that there. And there's a side of that starts to get a little scary. I mean, in China, they're using this right now for massive social engineering, right? They have this social credit score that since there's basically no cash transaction in China, every time you use something, you're using your smartphone. So they're tracking every one of your movements throughout society, every one of your purchases, and they're giving people a social credit score, which makes, if you have a high credit score, you get a lower interest rate on a loan, for instance. And they're using this to engineer behavior. And this starts to feel like a kind of softer authoritarianism. And what is incentivizing the massive collection of data and this is as a media scholar, what interests me, is that the algorithms that they design are designed to keep you engaged. We have an attention economy in online. And what they know is that we attend to things like outrage more.
Yeah.
So like every minute there are something like 4.3 million YouTube views. And YouTube has an autoplay feature that'll line up the next one for you. And the scholars look at this and they say that it tends to, so if you say you watch a Trump rally, the next thing you do is going to be a white supremacist. And it'll get increasingly more paranoid because they know that that's what pulls you into an
deeper
attention.
and deeper.
And that's machine learning that has figured that one out. So the incentives, because they want to keep you there to feed you advertising that they've then sold to advertisers. So the machine learning and the algorithms are structurally determined so that even if we have good CEOs for these companies, the machines are doing things with the data that kind of start to border on unethical.
So I saw two paths there. One was, I keep pulling you in, I'm watching you, you're going to watch an advertisement as you do it, and I'm pulling you in. But it sounds to me like you also have the potential to manipulate society in a big way, politically or some other way. Yeah. And of course, that's not the way people have described the worries about the elections. They describe it as, you know, people posting things and getting people to be upset, to focus on wedge issues, but they don't really describe it in the media as actually the potential of using big data to manipulate how voters feel about issues. But that's what you're seeing.
Yeah.
No, I think that there has been some stuff in the media about that, particularly voter manipulation. It's not that different from targeted advertising, right?
Yeah.
You figure out that you know, there are some buttons you can push for some voters, and then you push those buttons, and then you expect them to act on those, right? So that's happening. So that's sort of on the negative side. But I would, you know, sort of turn back to, there are potential benefits to this technology. So it's like fire, right? I mean, you can use fire to cook food, or you can burn stuff. And so I think we have to figure out how best to make use of this technology. And
It makes perfectly good sense that we really do have to pay attention to
Right.
this and hopefully have those rules in place that provide that safety and security for a lot of different reasons. I can also imagine that in the beginning of sort of big data, that there are examples where you go, whoops, we didn't come out with the right answer. So was the prediction at the last election, which turned out differently, was that an example of big data that was coming out of all of the analysis of and polls and information and statistics about people? Was that an example where big data came out and it was wrong?
Possibly, and I can tell you many other examples.
Yeah, well, good. Give me a
so-
good example
so
of where, you know, we took all this massive amount of data and it didn't come
so
out.
yeah, so if you're not very careful in how you use the data, and if you don't know the story behind the data,
Yeah.
because data didn't just come about, right?
Right, yeah.
So you sample people with surveys, you know, maybe you call people up, and there's a science of how to survey people. You call people up, and the people you called were a biased sample to begin with. You get a certain picture of what might happen, so that's one thing. But basically, all of this data is comes with a story behind it, right? So why was it gathered? How was it gathered? Who was asked? And so if you don't take all of that into account and make corrections for it, correcting for the bias in sampling and things like that, you could go horribly wrong with these predictions. But even in simple cases like, you could look at data sets, and if you just look at the data using statistical or machine learning methods, you would come to absolutely the wrong conclusion, because the data is not the complete story. So the data is only part of the story. So for example, you could look at statistics about vaccinations and deaths, and you could conclude that vaccination is harmful. And it would be perfectly justified based on sort of surface statistical analysis. But then if you know why that data is the way it is, for example, if you know that there's a policy in place to vaccinate, and most people get vaccinated, 99% of the people vaccinated, 1% don't, and some fraction of the people that get vaccinated get a reaction and they end up with a bad outcome. Then you put that together. So that story was not part of the data, but you put it together, then you draw a completely different conclusion. You would find out that vaccination is actually good for you. So I think there are lots of ways in which we could use these big data sets incorrectly, if you're not doing it with care.
So is this the type of thing that your institute does, that it's really focused on how it is used, the data, and where the errors might be?
And the methodologies to
and the
correct
methodologies to do it well?
Yeah.
So basically it's standardizing this. So maybe it would be good to just sort of describe, what does someone look for with the data? What are they actually doing with it? Is it just a massive number of correlations, or?
So if you do sort of standard machine learning or statistical analysis, you're looking for complex correlations.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, even the most sophisticated machine learning technique is going to take some input and going to predict some output based on
These 14 things, and I know.
Yeah. So, but there is a sort of emerging field of that's related to machine learning, and it has to do with causality. So going beyond sort of correlations and looking at causal relationships. Now we know that you cannot get established causal relationships if you only had observational data. You have to have, in general, you need the ability to manipulate the world. You need to run an experiment. But even in cases where we only have observational data, there are circumstances under which we can draw causal inferences. So that's a relatively underexplored area of machine learning and artificial intelligence that is becoming increasingly important.
So can I ask you, when you're on your computers, smartphones, are you constantly thinking about who's watching, and is that affecting your behavior?
Sadly, no. You know, I'm aware of it, and I think this is probably what they know about most people, is that we're aware of it on a kind of a level, but there's something very powerful about these tools. You know, they pull us in.
You can get what you want easily.
Right.
You know, you can.
And the visual stimulation and the thrill of research on the computer.
Yeah.
That people will go places they probably shouldn't go. So I don't pay as much attention to that. You know, mostly because I'm just shopping or looking at Facebook.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, I don't know that.
Now, do you ever think I'm going to fool the people collecting big data by doing some things that will throw them off because you understand how it works?
They're smart enough to know the things that apparently Facebook tracks the things you start to post and then erase, because those become data points as well. That they can understand. So there is no escape from the big eye in the sky.
Well, this is a fascinating topic. I wish we had a lot more time. What if you go out 10 years from now, what do we have? What's your prediction? Is it the Wild West and everybody for themselves, or will we see a regulated environment that protects individuals?
I think we'll see it's happening already. There was a response to this. We have huge asymmetries of power in relation to these monopolies that are now. I mean, Facebook owns 5 of the top 7 platforms out there. That's going to have to change. And I see a lot more of the stories that he was describing. People are going to start asking questions they should ask about everything. What is a good life? What do we want society to be, that really aren't questions for machine learning, but are questions for us to determine with one another.
Yeah.
But there's also a question of who owns the data, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, right now the companies own the data.
Yeah.
It's your data, but they own it.
Yeah.
So we could turn that on its head, and individuals own the data.
If people stand up and say, I want to own my own data.
Right, and that's a societal issue.
Well, thank you so much. What a fascinating topic, and one I guess is going to become more and more important to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Barron, fascinating discussion on big data that we had.
It really was, wasn't it?
Definitely, definitely. And it really is big data. It's inevitable. It's everywhere. So what is Penn State doing to protect the data of tens of thousands of students on this campus?
So we work very hard at this. We've really thought about this in a lot of different ways. A kind of perimeter around the university that is there to be able to detect intrusions, partly because in the past we've had issues. We've gone to a single system, Office 365, which simplifies and provides an added protection that is there. Mail servers are often a way in which people enter. We had more than a couple of dozen different mail servers. We are going to get it down to 1. We're very close to reaching that particular point. All of those things to make what we do more secure. And we're constantly scanning materials that we have to make sure Social Security numbers are not there and other things are not there. But of course, what we were just listening to is quite different than just protecting your Social Security number. It's someone constantly watching what and how you do things, and then making predictions about you, and then feeding you something that they think they can sell or use or for some advantage. And it makes you think about what it is you should be doing online and what it is you shouldn't be doing online.
And I can say from the student perspective, we love the new Streamline 365, easier on our end and more protective, as you mentioned.
Yep.
So
that's a good thing.
So what can we as students do to protect our data? You mentioned what Penn State's doing, but what can we as students do to make sure that we're safe?
Yeah, it was interesting to hear from Matt there, because he's saying, this doesn't stop me from doing things. There is this allure, this attractiveness of something that you're interested in, and you're pulled deeper into it. But there was kind of a note of caution there about realizing that, even something you're erasing is still sitting there as part of a data set. To realize that there's some places perhaps you shouldn't be thinking about going because of what the implications might be there. So it seems like it's being smart about what you're doing and what you're sharing, because somebody's watching it.
Always watching, eyes
Yeah.
are peeled. And from protecting data to protecting lives, students from Pennsylvania College of Technology's paramedic program have joined forces with Penn State's Emergency Medical Services for university's home football games.
Right.
There's 4 students per game.
Yeah.
And why, we've seen this time and time again, this hands-on learning experience. Why do you think it's so vital that Penn State students have this?
We see over and over again, if you can go from the classroom and what you've learned or what you're interested in to practical real-time experiences, you advantage the student. And it doesn't matter where it is and what it is, it becomes an additional component of your education that amplifies what it is that you're learning. So incredibly valuable, I would say, in every way, shape, and form. We should always be looking for those opportunities for hands-on learning.
And it makes that much more of a difference.
And it's fun.
It's definitely
Yep.
fun. And we hopefully will see more of that at the university too as we continue to grow and expand.
I hope so.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
Barron.
you.
Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. Learn more at alumni.psu.edu. And from viewers like you, thank you.